Greetings, all. Today we begin a three-act drama. The Renaissance is marked by three major conflicts which fundamentally shook Europe. Instead of art, drama, and other humanities nonsense, today we talk war. We cover the rise of the Ottomans, the end of the longest on-again, off-again love-hate relationship in history, the 100 Years' War, and conclude with the Great Schism. Let's begin with Osman's successors as they extend their control westward. In 1370, their holdings will stretch all the way to the Danube. In 1389, they defeated a powerful coalition of Serbian forces at the Battle of Kosovo, which enabled them to subdue the Balkans. In 1396, the Ottoman army attacked Constantinople, withdrew to repel an ineffectual crusading force hastily sent by the papacy. In 1402, another attack on Constantinople was defeated by Timur the Lame, or Tamerlane, who rose to prominence as a military leader and almost, but not quite, almost reunited the Mongol Empire. Sadly, he died in 1405 before he could achieve his goals. When the Mongols toppled the Seljuk Sultanate of Rum and the Abbasid Caliphate of Baghdad, Turkish chieftains now had free reign and were able to raid new areas. One of their chieftains, Osman Ghazi, 1258 to 1326, even managed to establish his own kingdom. His name became that of the Turkish dynasty that controlled this region for the next 6 centuries. For 600 years, the Ottomans will rule. In Anatolia, the Ottoman Turks were able to regain their dominant position as well.
This bust of the Mongol leader, known in the West as Tamerlane, is based on forensic reconstruction of his exhumed skull. As Ottoman pressure increased on Constantinople, a steady stream of scholars fled westward. In 1451, the Ottomans put the city under siege and took it in 1453. The Byzantine emperor was killed in the assault. The city was plundered and the remaining population was sold into slavery. This was an enormous shock to European rulers, but a minor economic impact. The bulk of Eastern luxury trade came through Venice, through Alexandria and Beirut. Now think of Constantinople. This was the inheritor of Rome. This was the rival for Venice. It was one of the largest cities in the world at the time. This is a city that was known throughout the West, even though it may have been looked upon askance, but it was nevertheless a city of Christendom. The Byzantine Empire had been slowly decreasing and at this time was very small. However, we have suddenly the destruction of a major city by the infidels. This caused great consternation throughout Europe. Matter of fact, so much that the Pope was tempted to order a crusade against it.
The psychological impact will indeed outweigh their economic one, since, of course, most of their trade had fallen way to Venice. But the Ottomans will actually do great things for the city, despite the West doing much in the form of wailing and gnashing of teeth. The effect of the conquest on the Turks was enormous. New wealth poured into Anatolia, which the Ottomans increased by tending the industrial and commercial interests of the city. Trade routes were redirected to feed the capital, and the Ottomans became a naval power in the eastern Mediterranean as well as the Black Sea. As a result, Istanbul, now Constantinople, now Istanbul, now Constantinople, now, would grow rapidly. from fewer than 100,000 in 1453 to more than 500,000. It will become the largest city in the world outside of China after the successors of Rome lost control of it. Oh, the irony.
This portrait, executed by the Ottoman artist Sibelizade Ahmed, exhibits stylistic features characteristic of both Central Asia and Europe. This is of the Sultan Mehmet II, also known as the Conqueror, who reigned between 1451 and 1481. The Sultan's pose, his aesthetic appreciation of the rose, his elegant handkerchief, are indicative of the former, as it is the fact that he wears the white turban of a scholar and the thumb ring of an archer. But the subdued coloring and three-quarter profile may reflect the influence of Italian portraits. What did the artist achieve through this blending of styles and symbols? What messages does this portrait convey?
Well, one thing the Ottomans will become known for is their systemized slavery. War captives, raiding forays, and ultimately recruits from the empire within itself will become slaves. Most will be coerced, some would go willingly. Household servants seemed to be an improvement over, well, impoverished peasant. In the Balkans, many people enslaved as children would be handed over by their families to pay what they call the child tax, a practice which offered the possibility of social advancement, and special academies would be created to train these enslaved boys. The size of the Ottoman army and administration will grow exponentially thanks to their slave labor. Both their bureaucracy and army were largely composed of slaves. Demand for more soldiers and administrators meant further conquests that would be purely to capture more slaves. Enslaved people were the backbone of the Ottoman state and critical to the lives of the Turkish upper class. An important measure of one's status was the number of enslaved people in their household.
Slavery had little stigma. Most were Christians, and the avenues of power thus excluded the Turks. Commerce and business largely were controlled by Greeks, Syrians, and Jews. The Jewish refugees were welcomed from Spain. Jews and Christians allowed some rights of self-government, and authority of the Patriarch of Constantinople was tolerated. Now, when we consider slavery, we can consider slavery to be an aspect of no self-determination. Many people are allowed to work in a prestigious environment and are only subject to their masters. Matter of fact, the masters themselves are obligated to treat those slaves with respect, and the master must look for their well-being. Now, the Ottomans actually allowed people to perform any given tasks except for rulership, ownership of property. We have scribes, we have teachers that were well respected and yet were slaves.
The Ottoman slave system truly is a different beast. You cannot conceive it as of, say, in a modern context of slavery or even in a Greco-Roman style of slavery either. It truly was an all-encompassing system. It's one of the few systems where a slave could have a linguistic or even university degree. The growth of the Ottoman Empire is shown here. Consider the patterns of the Ottoman expansion revealed in this map. Where is Constantinople, i.e. Istanbul, and how might its capture in 1453 have facilitated further conquests? Compare the extent of the Ottoman Empire in 1566 with that of the Byzantine Empire under Justinian, as you see here. How would you account for their similarities? But onto the three major religions, at least at this point: Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. They would forbade the sale or ownership of individuals who shared the same faith. Little evidence of skin color or even phenotype was the marker of a racial identity. Evidence, especially from northern Christendom, that Jews and Muslims were becoming associated with certain physical stereotypes did occur. Jews were depicted with reddish hair and hooked noses. Muslims had been known to be dark-skinned or swarthy. This is also where the term swarthy comes from when Tolkien uses it in Lord of the Rings. Others would see the exotic appearance as an eventual racial construct, but you have to see this as something happening in the far future, not quite yet, guys.
Now let's look at warfare and nation building. In 1453, heavy artillery was playing a leading role in two crucial conflicts: the Ottoman capture of Constantinople and the French capture of the English-held city of Bordeaux, which was ending the Hundred Years' War. Now, cannons made it difficult for rebellious aristocrats to hole up in their stone castles and aided in the consolidation of national monarchies. They were placed aboard ships, which made Europe's developing navies more effective. The pistol was invented during the 14th century. Europeans were almost constantly at war. Governments claimed new powers to tax their subjects and to recruit them. Armies became larger and military technology deadlier. Most successful European states were expansionist, and they were engaging in creating a national identity that would bind their peoples against a common enemy.
Let's look at two examples, those of muskets and cannons. Though we skip my beloved handgun, we will say they're invented around 1500. They existed before that, but I digress. They ended the dominance of heavily armored cavalry, though bulletproof armor will persist. This is actually where we get the term bulletproof from. They would also give advantage to foot soldiers who would be recruited from the ranks of average citizens, as pretty much anyone with two hands and a brain can operate firearms and doesn't require the years of training and physical fitness that, say, warbow use does. Here is a 15th century siege with cannons, as they are an essential element in siege warfare during the 100 Years' War. You have to realize that medieval-style castle walls are not built nearly thick enough, nor of the composite material layering needed to withstand cannon shot. It's not soft surface, soft surface between another layer of hard surface, right, to really soak as much energy out of the shell as possible. These are largely thin hard surface, some infill, and another thin hard surface, with some exceptions.
Now, there were three phases of the Hundred Years' War. The first dates from the initial declaration of war in 1337, after which the English won a series of military victories before the Black Death halted hostilities. The second was with the war resuming in 1356, with an English victory at Poitiers. 4 years later, Edward III renounced his claim to the French throne in order for a guarantee of sovereignty over a greatly enlarged Gascony. The terms of the treaty were never honored, and Edward and his heirs quickly renewed their claim to the French throne. Third, when conflict resumes in 1376, it became a Europe-wide phenomenon. Now, the 100 Years' War actually was a territorial and successional dispute between England and France, all stemming from the reign of William the Conqueror, and the Norman English holdings in France were considered to be in vassalage in France. Obviously, we have a conflict here, and this was going to cause a political rift between England and France, and slowly but surely, there was going to be repercussions throughout Europe.
This, of course, ultimately culminates with Edward III and truly beginning what we consider the 100 Years' War. But here is a map, because sometimes these things are a little easier to visualize. Here we see the three major snapshots of the political geography of France throughout the 100 Years' War. In what areas of France did England make its greatest territorial gains prior to 1360? Ask yourself how and why did this change in this period leading up to 1429? Also, what geographic and strategic advantages did the French monarchy have over the English as of 1429 that helps explain their success? And as always, remember the French merely do not have to lose. This is the English's fight to win. But I digress. In the second phase of the war, the tide is going to shift toward Charles V of France. His reign would last from 1364 to 1380. He imposed a series of taxes to fund the raising of a new army. He restored order by disbanding the free companies, hiring the leader of one of those bands to command his army, creating a professional military to match the English. By 1380, English territories in France were really reduced to a core area around Bordeaux and Calais.
In England, Edward III was succeeded by his 9-year-old grandson, Richard II, who reigned from 1377 to 1399. He was too young to resume armed conflict in France. And of course, mismanagement by Richard's advisors triggered the Peasants' Revolt in 1381. When he showed no signs of warlike ambition, relatives turned against him, exiled his cousin Henry of Lancaster, which sparked rebellion. In 1399, Richard was deposed by Henry and eventually murdered.
But let's rewind. Henry V immediately began to prepare for an invasion. The French royal government was foundering under the insanity of Charles VI, 1380 to 1422. They would seal an alliance with the Duke of Burgundy and make a treaty with the German emperor. They will be invaded in 1415 and faced a much depleted French army, really without reinforcement, and they will also be hampered by bad weather. Henry IV, 1399 to 1413, was seen as a usurper and struggled to maintain his authority in the face of multiple rebellions. He also was ill and in no position to personally lead an army, and you cannot realize how important that position is in the medieval world, or the Renaissance world for that matter. But by October of 1415, we have the greatest English victory, that of Agincourt, where the English, of course, win a crushing victory from the jaws of defeat. And over the next 5 years, Henry will conquer most of northern France. In 1420, Charles VI would be forced to recognize him as heir, disinheriting his son, the Dauphin. Yes, it means dolphin. There's an excellent video by Blue from Overly Sarcastic Productions. I will include it here, if I remember to do so. Henry sealed the deal by marrying the French princess Catherine and fathering an heir to the joint kingdom of England and France. And if only this conflict had stopped there, how peaceful it could have been.
Now we have Joan of Arc's triumph. Henry and Charles VI both died in 1422, leaving the infant Henry VI, who reigned from 1422 to 1461, to be crowned King of England and France. The English armies continued to press southward into territories held by the Dauphin. French confidence in his right to the throne were shattered by his mother's declaration that he was illegitimate. He looked as though England would once again rule an empire comprising much of France, as it had under Henry II. Henry's successes in France transformed the nature of the conflict, turning it into a long and expensive military occupation. In 1429, a peasant girl from Lorraine came to the Dauphin's court and announced an angel had told her that Charles was the rightful king, and she should strive to drive the English out of France. Charles gave Joan of Arc a contingent of troops, and she liberated Orleans, under siege by the English, and then led her army to a series of victories that culminated in the coronation of the Dauphin as King Charles VII in the Cathedral of Rennes.
Here we have a contemporary sketch of Joan. It was drawn in the margin of this register documenting the official proceedings at the Parliament of Paris in 1429. Despite her successes, Charles and his generals regarded Joan with embarrassment. A peasant leading the nobility? A woman, even? A woman dominating men? Less? And a commoner claimed to have been commissioned by God? Ultimately, from their perspective, her charisma is what made her dangerous. When captured by the Burgundians in battle and handed over to the English as a prisoner of war, French king chose not to save her. She will be accused of witchcraft, condemned by the theologians of Paris, and tried for heresy by an English ecclesiastical court. To be clear, she was doomed from the start. The English wanted her dead as revenge. Joan will be burned, surprise, surprise, in the market square at Rouen in 1431. The French forces, whom Joan had inspired, will of course continue on their offensive. In 1435, the Duke of Burgundy withdrew his alliance with the English, whose young king, Henry VI, was pretty much insane. A series of French victories culminated in the capture of Bordeaux. After 1453, English control over French territory was limited to the port of Calais and the English Channel.
Now, there was a long shadow cast by the 100 Years' War. The effects on the English monarchy showed that when the English armies in France were successful, the king's popularity fueled an emerging sense of English identity. When war turned against the English, defeats undermined support for the monarch. Of the 9 kings who ruled between 1307 and 1485, 5 were deposed and murdered by factions.
Thus, the 100 Years' War will ultimately strengthen English identity. They're going to equate national identity with the power of the state and its king. This will foment a strong anti-French sentiment that led to the triumph of the English language over that of French. And this anti-French sentiment will last all the way up until World War I, guys. Nobody thought the English were going to back the French in World War I, but that was a story for another day. England became a self-contained island nation that looked to the sea for defense as well as opportunity. It would cease looking to the continent. England could not afford the weak kingship of Henry VI, thus they get rid of him. The Wars of the Roses will end when the Lancastrian claimant Henry Tudor, 1485 to 1509, ruled as King Henry VII, establishing a new dynasty.
Now in Italy, Venice, Milan, and Florence subordinated other cities to their rule. Apart from Genoa, almost all of northern Italy allied with one of these powers. In central and southern Italy, the papacy had reasserted its control over central Italy when restored to Rome in 1377. The southern kingdom of Naples and Sicily persisted as unstable, riven by local warfare and poor government. With the papacy established in Avignon, Rome was torn by factional violence. Warfare among northern Italian city-states added to the violence created and caused by the post-plague urban rebellions. Around 1400, Venice, Milan, and Florence succeeded in stabilizing their governments. Venice was ruled by an oligarchy of merchants. Milan was ruled by a family of despots, and Florence was ruled as a republic dominated by the influence of a few wealthy clans, especially the Medici. By 1453, an uneasy peace was achieved. Diplomacy and shifting alliances did not check the ambitions of any state for expansion or change the fact that none of these small-scale states could oppose the powerful national monarchies that were emerging north of the Alps.
Periodically, a powerful emperor would emerge, but the dominant trend was toward the dissolution of power, with German princes dividing territories amongst their heirs, while free cities and lords would strive to shake off the prince's rule. Between 1350 and 1450, near anarchy prevailed in many regions. Only in the eastern regions of the empire were where the rulers of Bavaria, Austria, and Brandenburg, Prussia, where they were only in the eastern regions of the empire where the rulers of Bavaria, Austria, and Brandenburg, Prussia, were they able to strengthen their authority. They would support the efforts of the nobility to subject the peasants to serfdom. They conquered and colonized new territories on their eastern frontiers to help bring in revenue. But let's turn our attention away from the German states and toward Poland. Here we have Wawel Cathedral in Krakow. King Jadwiga of Poland and her infant daughter are entombed in the royal burial chamber of this magnificent church, and yes, you heard me right, which combines elements of the medieval Romanesque, Gothic, but also Byzantine architecture styles. In it is surrounded by the royal castle on the Wawel hill overlooking the river Vistula.
Poland was economically enriched by welcoming the expelled Jewish communities and benefited from German immigrants, mostly merchants, with ties to the Hanseatic League. To attract newcomers, the rulers of Poland and other Eastern European kingdoms granted special charters to the towns in which they settled. Charters granted citizens the right of self-governance, collectively known as Magdeburg Law. Post-plague, more towns took advantage of these privileges, promoting the urbanization of once rural regions into creating a web of prosperous, ethnically and religiously diverse cities that generated enormous wealth. With commercial benefits of these towns came intellectual benefits, universities, established by the Emperor Charles IV in the Bohemian capital of Prague in 1347. The Polish King Casimir III, who reigned from 1333 to 1370, followed by establishing a university in Krakow in 1364. Universities in Vienna and Pest in Hungary also established in the next few years.
The Elgonian dynasty formed when the young female ruler of Poland, Jadwiga, married the Grand Duke of Lithuania, Yageo. Jadwiga had been crowned king in 1384 when barely 10, Polish lords insisted on the title because they did not want her future husband ruling over them. They looked to Lithuania and gave Poland more access to the Baltic Sea and protection from the Teutonic Knights of Prussia. Jadwiga agreed, though Duke Jagiełło was 30 years her senior and also a pagan. Political marriage indeed. They will marry after Jagiełło's conversion to the Roman Church in 1386. He received the royal baptismal name of Władysław II. They will rule their realms jointly, tripling the size of Poland and Lithuania and making it the largest and most powerful state in Central Europe. To be fair, they're really only competing against 3 German states, but I digress. The university at Krakow became an intellectual powerhouse, promoted the Polish vernacular, and encouraging the translation of the Bible. In 1997, Jadwiga is canonized as a saint in the Catholic Church.
Here we have the royal chapel of King Władysław II Jagiełło. This image captures only some of the hundreds of magnificent paintings that decorate the walls in this chapel in Lublin, in Poland. This cycle of frescoes, which depict scenes from the Bible, was commissioned by King Jagiełło after the death of his royal wife, Jadwiga. The paintings, completed in 1418, were executed by a team of master artists from the Ukraine, who combined Eastern Orthodoxy imagery and styles from those of Western Europe. Based on what you have learned about Jagiełło, why would he have chosen to decorate his chapel in this way?
I guarantee you, if you look around the architecture, you will find somebody in some mortise somewhere sitting with their pants down. Keep an eye out in medieval architecture. They always peek out of the oddest circumstances. Medieval humor really was bawdy and quite fun. But on to a less pleasant topic, the Great Western Schism. In 1377, Gregory was persuaded to make a move. A year after Gregory's return to Rome, he died. Cardinals suggested to interpret the wishes of the Romans. The cardinals will struggle to interpret the wishes of the Romans, who expressed themselves rather violently. Later, cardinals will claim that they capitulated to the Roman mob when they elect an Italian, that is to say, Urban VI. The cardinals will later flee the city and declare his reign invalid since they were forced to elect him under duress. They will then elect a new pope, a more French pope, Clement VII. Thus, we have the birth of the Great Western Schism. It will last from 1378 to 1417. Then later 3 popes who will each take turns denouncing each other and splitting Europe apart amongst factional lines. Calls for the papacy's return to Rome will grow more insistent. A letter-writing campaign of the nun and mystic Catherine of Siena, 1347 to 1380, will shame and condemn Gregory XI for his actions. That is to say, his reign would last from 1370 to 1378. Europe's religious alliances will fracture along these political lines. In 1409, some cardinals from both camps will meet in Pisa, depose both popes, elect a new one. This is where we get 3 popes now waging war with each other. 3 rival popes instead of 2 excommunicating each other. We're almost at that Spider-Man meme territory. Just wait. Urban retaliated by naming a new Italian college of cardinals. The French Pope and his cardinals will withdraw to Avignon, while the Italian Pope will remain in Rome. So, let's ask ourselves, how might the Great Schism have represented an opportunity for the Roman Catholic Church to reform itself and make itself more in tune with the needs of the people? Why didn't they seize upon this opportunity? Why did they stick doggedly to their guns and refuse to conform? Oh, wait, I'm getting ahead of myself.
During the Great Western Schism, the various territories of Europe were divided in their allegiances. According to the map key, what choices were the peoples of these regions making? What common interests would have united the supporters of the Avignon Pope or of the Roman Pope? And why would such areas such as Portugal and Austria waver in their support?
Sadly, we must bring this third debacle of the Renaissance to an end, with it really being addressed between 1414 and 1418 with the Council of Constance, or Council von Constanz, if you want to use the German title. It is the largest and longest ecclesiastical gathering since the Council of Nicaea. It removed all claimants from papal office and instead elects a new pope, an Italian, Martin V. Martin and his successors would try to undermine this doctrine when the next Grand Council met in Siena in 1423. Martin sent representatives who immediately left. Delegates to the Grand Council at Basel would take steps to ensure the Pope could not dismiss that one instead. There would be a lengthy battle between the advocates of a papal monarchy and those who preferred a council, or more limited form of papal government, called the Conciliarists. In 1449, the Council of Basel will dissolve itself and ended the conciliar movement with nothing being achieved.
But many delegates had plans for church reform that stemmed from the legal doctrine that gave the council the power to depose and elect popes. Conciliarism hopes that supreme authority in the church rests with the representative general council. The delegates at Constance decreed that general councils meet regularly to oversee the governance of the church and act as a check on papal power.
Ironically, some of the greatest spiritual change will not come from the Great Schism, but actually from the Black Death, of all things. In the wake of the Black Death, large numbers of Christians who were disillusioned, and they will develop forms of piety that are distinctly controversial. These will include women. Catherine of Siena, 1347 to 80, would refuse to help with housework or support her working class family. Instead, she took over one of the house's 2 rooms for her own private prayers. Julianne of Norwich, 1342 to 1416, withdrew into a small cell next to her local church, spending the rest of her life in prayer and contemplation. Marjorie Kemp, 1372 to 1439, renounced domestic duties in her life and devoted her life to performing acts of histrionic piety. She would cry at Mass and on pilgrimage. Do these kind of sound familiar? You see the pattern here? Extraordinary piety of these individuals and others like them was inspiring, but did threaten the church's control over religious life and could be regarded as dangerous. Practical mysticism, preached by, as an example, Thomas A. Kempis, whose Imitation of Christ in 1427 taught his readers how to appreciate aspects of the divine in their everyday lives. It would be written in Latin and was quickly translated into many vernaculars.
In Poland, a professor at Krakow, Paulus Vladimiri, between 1370 and 1435, wrote a treatise that criticized papal and imperial efforts to convert the peoples of the Baltic by force through the Teutonic Knights. He argued that neither had the power to do so, claiming that pagans and Christians could coexist peacefully. He advanced these arguments as the Polish representative to the Council of Constance. Some reform movements were galvanized by respected intellectuals. Some Lollards dismissed the sacraments as attempts to extort money. Lollard preachers promoted an English translation of the Bible sponsored by Wycliffe. Wycliffe's teaching played a role in the Peasants' Revolt of 1381. After a failed Lollard uprising in 1414, both the movement and its supporters went underground.
And this brings us to one of our last subjects of today, and the long death and effects of A, the Black Death, but B, the Great Schism. That is to say, the Oxford theologian John Wycliffe and his successors. He asserted that the empty sacraments of a corrupt church couldn't save anyone. He urged the English king to confiscate ecclesiastical wealth and to replace corrupted priests and bishops with men living according to apostolic poverty and piety. Here we have Wycliffe's English Bible. Although John Wycliffe was not directly responsible for this translation of the Bible, it was made in the later 14th century by his followers, written in the same Middle English vernacular of Geoffrey Chaucer, which he used for his popular works. It was designed to be accessible to lay readers who didn't understand Latin. This page shows the beginning of the Gospel of Mark. Note that the Old English letter thorn stands for TH in this section. What might have been the impact of this translation on readers and listeners in the late 14th century? How would this English Bible have helped to further the reforming efforts of Wycliffe and his disciples? Now,
Jan Hus, between 1373 and 1415, was a teacher at the Charles University in Prague. In contrast to the Lollards, Huss emphasized the centrality of the Eucharist in piety. He demanded the laity receive both the consecrated bread and the consecrated wine. The similarities of Lollardy and Hussitism was the university movements that spread to the country, advocation of apostolic poverty for the church, initial aristocratic support, and national movements against a foreign church. The teachings of Jan Hus: he was a religious reformer. He was burned at the stake in 1415 after he was found guilty of heresy at the Council of Constance. This woodcut portrait was featured in the booklet printed in Germany and circulating wildly in Protestant realms, including Huss's native Bohemia. After 1587, more than 170 years after his death. What does Huss's commemoration in this booklet suggest about how his image and theology were put to use during the later Protestant Reformation?
Hussite movement would gain support, and Huss traveled to the Council of Constance to publish his views and urge delegates to undertake reforms. Instead, he's convicted of heresy and burned at the stake. See what I mean? They really didn't embrace reform. Huss's supporters would revolt, and the aristocracy will seize church property. Between 1420 and 24, armed bands of Hussites defeated several armies. Victories will increase their popular fervor, but made radical reformers increasingly volatile. In 1434, the conservative arm of the movement negotiated a settlement with the Bohemian Church. Bohemians could receive both the bread and the wine of the Mass. And that brings us to the end of the major conflicts of the Renaissance. Join us next time as we turn our attention to a world where Europe finally looks beyond its borders, crosses the ocean, and of course we investigate not just the colonial side of the Renaissance, but the more typical artistic side, the stuff you'd learn about in, say, art history class and that kind of thing. Alright, y'all, this has been a mammoth of an episode. I'd appreciate a like, share, subscribe, that usual kind of thing. Leave a comment. YouTube seems to not like this kind of content, so please share if you can. And, as always, I will see you again next time.